My daughter-in-law, Clara, made a simple mistake today. She handed me the wrong lunch cooler. It seemed like a harmless mix-up, something to chuckle about later when I got home from the shipyard. But when my partner, a retired marine engineering officer named Javier, looked inside that box, he didn't laugh. He went still. He looked me dead in the eye, his hands, usually steady as anchors, trembling, and said, "Victor, get your son to the hospital right now." "Why?" I asked, confused. I was standing on the hot steel deck of a massive cargo vessel in the Baltimore port, squinting into the midday sun. I was 80 years old, and my name is Victor Rourke. I should be retired, sailing my own small boat down the coast. Instead, I'm working on a team, supervising welding inspections, balancing on beams high above the water alongside men young enough to be my grandsons. Javier didn't answer right away. He just crushed a tiny, white pill from the container between his thumb and forefinger. It pulverized instantly, falling as fine, chalky dust onto the rusted metal deck. "Because if he takes what's in this box, Victor," Javier finally said, his voice flat and dangerously low, "he won't see next month's sunrise." That moment didn't just scare me. It shattered the foundation of my life. It destroyed every illusion I held about my family, my son, and the woman he married. 6 months ago, my wife, Eleanor, left us. Not by choice, but by the swift cruelty of a sudden illness. Before the dirt settled on her grave, my son, David, came to me begging for help. He was suffocating under a crushing mountain of debt, trying to sustain a colossal, custom-built stone house that was far beyond his means. David has a severe, chronic immune disorder that targets his heart. Stress is literally a killer for him. Watching him hyperventilate, his face turning gray as he clutched his chest, I did what any father would do, what Eleanor would have expected. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. I sold my own home, our modest, paid-off forever house on the coast, the house full of 50 years of memories, and gave him a staggering $300,000 for a capital injection. I moved into a cramped, leaking apartment near the docks, an absolute tomb of peeling paint and noisy pipes. I went back to work at the shipyard, hauling equipment, climbing scaffolds, and enduring the brutal heat and cold. I sacrificed my golden years, my health, and my peace so he could be safe, stable, and stress-free. And Clara, his wife, had seemed like an angel. She was the picture of a devoted daughter-in-law. Every morning at 5:30 sharp, she would bring me a packed lunch and a thermos of hot tea before I left for the site. "You need your strength, Dad Victor," she always chirped, her smile sweet and bright. Today, that ritual became the start of a nightmare. At midday, my back aching like a rusty hinge, I sat down on a coil of thick mooring rope to eat. I opened the charcoal gray cooler she'd handed me. It wasn't my usual stainless steel lunchbox. It was a padded, soft-sided bag. It was David's. Inside, next to a gourmet chicken salad sandwich, was his weekly pill planner. I sighed, frustration overriding my hunger. David needed those pills at noon sharp. They were specialized immunosuppressants and a complex cardiac stabilizer. Without them, his body would begin to turn on itself. I picked up the container. Today was Wednesday. The compartment for the noon dose held 4 pills. 2 small, dark crimson ones, and 2 larger, gleaming white capsules. 5-star dining, Victor. I looked up. It was Javier, wiping sweat from his brow. He sat down next to me on a stack of timber. "Just a mix-up," I said, showing him the box. "Clara gave me David's meds. I've got to run them over to his office later." Javier froze. He stared at the gleaming white capsules. He didn't blink. "Let me see that." He took the pill organizer. He was silent for a long moment, then pulled out the large white capsule. He sniffed it. It had no medicinal scent. Then he used the edge of a small utility blade he kept on his belt to carefully scrape the capsule. It didn't crack or flake. It simply dissolved into that fine, soft dust. Javier tasted the powder on his finger and immediately spat it out, wiping his tongue on his handkerchief. "Victor," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "what is your son supposed to be taking?" "Immunoglobulin, extended release," I said, "and the cardiac stabilizer." "Why?" Javier looked at me with an expression of genuine, cold fear. I was a medic in the Marines for 10 years before I went engineering. That stabilizer, the real thing, it has a tough polymer coating. It's hard to crush. This, he rubbed the dust between his fingers. This is nothing but cornstarch and chalk. It's a placebo, a complete fake. I laughed nervously, trying to push the terror back. You're crazy, Javier. Clara picks these up from the central pharmacy herself. They cost a fortune. Then she's picking up lies, Javier snapped. He grabbed my shoulder, his grip like steel. Look at the texture. Someone pressed this in a low-grade mold. Victor, listen to me. If your son has a heart that's barely running and he thinks he's medicated, but he's eating kitchen filler, his heart isn't getting help. It's shutting down. The disorder is unchecked. My entire body went cold. I looked at the organizer. Monday and Tuesday were empty. He had been swallowing these for 2 days. If he's been off his life-saving meds for 48 hours, Javier whispered, his eyes wide, he is a walking cardiac event. Call him now, before his body crashes. I stared at the innocent white powder on the rusty steel deck. It looked harmless, but as the terrifying realization hit me, it looked like the weapon of a crime in progress. My son wasn't just sick. He was being methodically, silently erased. My hand was shaking so violently that I almost dropped the phone onto the steel floor. Javier's words were echoing in my skull like a repetitive stress hammer. Won't see next month's sunrise. I looked at the pill organizer in my hand. Wednesday, full of chalk. Monday and Tuesday empty. My son had been ingesting a death sentence for 2 full days. I dialed David first. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to know he was still breathing. The phone rang and rang and rang. Each ring felt like a countdown clock. Pick up, son. Please just pick up. Then the voicemail clicked on. Hi, you've reached David. Leave a message. His voice sounded so happy, recorded back when life was merely difficult, not deadly. I couldn't speak. I couldn't leave a message saying, hey, son, stop taking your meds. They're fake. I hung up, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Call her, Javier said, his voice grim. Call the wife. Right? Clara. She was the one who packed the lunch. She was the one who picked up the prescriptions. I dialed her number. The phone felt impossibly slippery in my sweating palm. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Dad Victor? She chirped. Her voice was bright, sunny, and completely out of sync with the terror freezing my blood. Did you enjoy the chicken salad? I used that organic mustard you like. Clara. I choked out, my voice sounding wrecked like I'd swallowed sand. You sent me David's lunch cooler. There was a split second of silence on the line, a sharp intake of breath, then an eruption of panicked noise. Oh my God, Dad Victor, she shrieked, her voice shooting up an octave, frantic and terrified. I am so sorry. I'm such an idiot. I realized at the moment. I pulled out of the driveway. I was rushing to get Lily to her art class. I must have swapped them. I'm on my way to his office right now with his actual cooler. I am so sorry. She sounded perfect. She sounded exactly like a frazzled, loving mother making an honest, simple mistake. For a heartbeat, I doubted Javier. Could he be wrong? But then I looked down at the fine white powder dusting the deck. Clara, listen to me, I said, trying to channel the authority of the foreman I once was. Javier is here. He used to be a combat medic. He looked at David's pills. I paused, needing to hear her breathe, needing to hear the truth in the heavy silence. He says they are fake, Clara. He says they are just compressed cornstarch. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I could hear the faint, distant horn of a ferry on her end. I waited for the denial. I waited for her to scream that Javier was crazy. I waited for the panic of a wife, realizing her husband was in immediate danger. Instead, she laughed. It wasn't a villain's cackle. It was a breathy, relieved chuckle, the sound of someone who had just narrowly avoided a catastrophic car accident. Oh, Dad Victor, she sighed, her voice smoothing out instantly, like expensive velvet. You scare me half to death. Is that all? Oh, thank God. Is that all? Is that all? I repeated, stunned. Clara, there is no medicine in these pills. I know, Dad, she said, her tone shifting to something confidential. almost conspiratorial. I completely forgot to tell you. It's the new protocol. I've been so scatterbrained lately. What protocol? I asked, looking at Javier. He was shaking his head slowly, his eyes dark with suspicion. Dr. Alistair Chun, she said. He's the new specialist we're seeing. He's from a Johns Hopkins team, top of the field. He believes David's body has built up a tolerance to the cardiac stabilizers. They aren't working like they should. She spoke fast, confidently, using medical buzzwords that sounded expensive and trustworthy. He wants to do a full system flush. He wants to detox David's system before starting him on a new, experimental biocompound from Germany. It's called Cardioluminar. It costs $3,500 a month, but it could save his life. But cornstarch, I stammered. Why cornstarch? Her voice dropped to a sympathetic whisper. Because of David, Dad. You know how anxious he is. If we told him he was going off his meds for 5 days, he would panic. His blood pressure would spike, and the stress alone could kill him. So Dr. Chun prescribed a blind cycle. We give him placebos. We trick his mind into staying calm while his body detoxes. It's brilliant, really. I stood there, an 80-year-old shipyard supervisor covered in grease and dust, listening to this sophisticated, terrifying explanation. Detox, blind cycle, German compound. It almost made sense in a terrifying, twisted way. I desperately wanted it to make sense. You absolutely cannot tell him, Dad, Clara pleaded, her voice dripping with protective concern. If he knows, the placebo effect stops, the anxiety comes back. You have to promise me. Secrecy is part of the prescription. She sounded so protective, so loving. I felt a sudden wave of sharp, scalding shame. I had accused this woman of murder in my mind. Okay, I said, feeling foolish and weak. I promise I won't say a word. Good, she said. Just throw those empty capsules away. I'll handle everything. I hung up. I looked at Javier. It's a detox, I said, trying to convince myself. New doctor, placebo effect. Javier stared at the white powder on the deck. He looked at me with pity and cold fury. A detox for a failing heart, Victor? Javier spat. Taking a man off cardiac meds cold turkey? That doesn't sound like medicine. That sounds like a countdown timer. I went back to inspecting the welds, trying to drown out my thoughts with hard, physical labor. But the seed of doubt had been planted deep, and it was taking root. Why hadn't David mentioned a new, costly doctor? We talked every Sunday. And why did Clara sound so relieved, not confused, not angry, but relieved that I knew about the fake pills? As the sun began to sink below the horizon, the cold knot in my stomach tightened. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I had to know if Dr. Chun was real. I waited for 3 days. 3 agonizing days of staring at the mildew-stained ceiling of my $800 apartment, listening to the relentless drip of the faucet and the distant, mournful wail of port sirens. My gut was twisting in knots tighter than any high-tensile steel cable I had ever rigged. I wanted desperately to believe Clara. I wanted to believe that the $300,000 I sacrificed, the home I sold, and the retirement I gave up had bought my son a good life with a woman who truly loved him. But Javier's voice kept playing in my head like a broken recording. That doesn't sound like medicine. That sounds like a countdown timer. On Saturday morning, I couldn't take the suspense anymore. I climbed into my battered, rusted 2003 Ford Ranger pickup and drove north. I left the harsh, potholed streets of the Inner Harbor and headed toward the manicured, exclusive suburbs of northern Maryland. As I drove, the scenery changed dramatically. The pawn shops and tired diners vanished, replaced by sprawling, wooded lots and high-security, gated communities. I pulled up to the house I had fundamentally financed. It sat there like a granite monument to my sacrifice, a $1.5 million estate of dark brick and stone, complete with a 4-car garage and a towering, imported cedar tree in the front yard that probably cost more to water and maintain than I spent on groceries in a year. It was magnificent. It was perfect. And inside, I fear my son was slowly being murdered. I rang the doorbell. I didn't have a key. Guests don't have keys. And that's exactly what I was now, a perpetual guest in the house I'd bought. Clara answered the door. She was wearing perfectly fitted yoga wear and a soft, expensive cashmere cardigan, looking fresh and utterly composed. But when she saw me, her perfect smile faltered for a microsecond. It was a flash of raw, momentary annoyance before the mask of the worried, gracious daughter-in-law slid smoothly back into place. "Dad, Victor," she said, opening the door wider. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you. I just wanted to check on David," I said, stepping into the cavernous foyer. The floors were polished travertine marble. The air smelled of expensive, exotic lavender and a chilling, palpable silence. It was too quiet. "He's resting," Clara said quickly, subtly positioning herself in front of the wide, curving staircase as if to physically block my path. "The detox is incredibly intense today. Dr. Chun said the third and fourth days are the absolute hardest. His body is purging all the old synthetic compounds. He needs absolute quiet." I looked at her. I looked at the woman standing on a marble floor I had paid for. "I am his father, Clara," I said, my voice low and dangerously controlled. "I'm not going to wake him up if he's sleeping, but I'm going to see him." I walked past her. I didn't wait for permission. I climbed the wide, carpeted stairs, my heavy, steel-toed work boots feeling foreign and massive on the plush fabric. I felt completely out of place here, a rough, old man in a palace of lies, but I didn't care. I reached the master bedroom door. It was closed. I turned the handle and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't lavender. It was the thick, metallic scent of a very sick room. Stale sweat, sour breath, and an underlying tone of panic. The heavy, light-blocking drapes were drawn, shutting out the brilliant Saturday sunlight. It took a moment for my eyes, accustomed to the bright light of the shipyard, to adjust to the gloom. When they did, I saw him. David was lying in the center of the enormous king-sized bed. He looked small. My son, who used to lift boat anchors in high school, who built this career on sheer stubbornness, looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin. His face was the color of unbleached clay. His lips had a distinct, terrifying bluish tint. But it was his breathing that sent a shot of ice down my spine. It was wet, shallow, and rattling. Every inhale sounded like he was breathing through thick, oily sludge. "David," I whispered. He opened his eyes. They were glassy, unfocused. It took him a long moment to register who I was. "Dad," he wheezed. I walked over to the bed. I sat down on the edge, careful not to jostle him. I took his hand. It was cold and frighteningly clammy, like touching a recently landed fish. I looked at his ankles sticking out from under the heavy down duvet. They were grotesquely swollen, huge, and puffy with retained fluid. I'd seen that kind of edema before on construction sites when a guy's limb was crushed, but I knew what it meant medically. His heart wasn't pumping hard enough to circulate his blood. The fluid was pooling in his extremities. He was drowning in his own failing body. Giddy images. "How are you doing, son?" I asked, trying to keep the violent tremble out of my voice. "Tired, Dad," he rasped. "So tired. Chest feels like there's 100-pound welding weight sitting on it." Clara bustled into the room behind me. She was carrying a glass of purified water with a thin slice of cucumber floating in it. "Oh, David, honey, you need to hydrate," she cooed, her voice dripping with exaggerated, performing concern. She set the water down and aggressively adjusted his pillows, fluffing them unnecessarily. She looked at me with mournful eyes. "See," she whispered, "the toxins are coming out. He's utterly exhausted. But Dr. Chun said this is the breakthrough point. By Monday, he'll be a new man." I looked at David. He was struggling to sit up to drink, but his hands were shaking so violently he spilled water down his chin. Clara dabbed it away with a silk cloth, shushing him like an infant. It looked caring. It looked tender. But to me, watching my son wither away while she lectured about toxins, it looked like methodical torture. I needed to know. I needed to be sure. I had to expose her cover story. "David," I said, leaning in close, "I wanted to ask you something." Clara instantly stiffened. I could feel her eyes burning into the back of my neck. "Dad, let him rest," she warned, her voice low. I ignored her completely. "David," I said again, enunciating clearly, "how do you like this new specialist?" Dr. Alastair Chun? Is he treating you okay? David frowned. It was a slow, painful movement of his forehead muscles. He blinked, trying to process the words. Ooh, he whispered. Dr. Chun, I repeated, enunciating clearly. The specialist from Johns Hopkins. The one Clara told me about. The one doing this detox therapy. David looked at me. Then he looked at Clara, who was now a statue of tension at the foot of the bed. They looked back at me. The confusion in his eyes was absolute. It was genuine. There was no flicker of recognition. Dad, what are you talking about? He asked. His voice was stronger for a second, fueled by utter confusion. I don't have a doctor in Baltimore. I saw Dr. Elias last month. He's the only cardiologist I see. Who is Chun? The air left the room in a single rush. The silence that followed was deafening. It roared in my ears. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped sledgehammer. There it was. The truth. Naked and ugly. There was no Dr. Alastair Chun. There was no detox protocol. There was no expensive biocompound from Germany. My son was not detoxing. He was dying. He was going into full cardiac failure because he had not taken his life-saving medicine in 4 days. He was swallowing chalk pills while his heart slowly gave up the fight. I turned slowly to look at Clara. She was standing at the foot of the bed. The mask was gone. The worried, loving wife was gone. Her face was hard, angular, and chillingly cold. Her eyes were narrow slits of predatory focus. She was not looking at David. She was looking only at me. And in that look, there was no fear. There was no apology. There was only a sharp, venomous warning. She stepped forward, her voice tight and perfectly controlled. David, honey, you are confused again, she said, projecting a false, high-pitched sweetness. It's the brain fog. Dr. Elias referred us to Chun. Remember? You signed the papers weeks ago. You just forgot. It's a side effect of the withdrawal. She looked at me, and her eyes dared me to speak. Dared me to contradict her. Dared me to cause the stress that might actually kill him right there and then. Dad, Victor, stop confusing him, she hissed, shifting her attention entirely to me. You are upsetting him. His heart rate is going up. Do you want to hurt him? I looked back at David. He looked terrified. He was looking between us, trying to understand, try to remember a doctor that did not exist. His breathing was coming faster now, shallower. I don't remember, R.A., he gasped. I don't remember signing anything. It's okay. Sure. It's okay, she soothed, stroking his damp hair. Just close your eyes. Dad was just leaving. He didn't mean to scare you. She looked at me again, her gaze locking mine, and then she did something that chilled me to the bone. She pointed at the door. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a chilling command. Get out. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like they were encased in concrete. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by her expensive cardigan and shake the truth out of her. But I looked at David. He was struggling, clutching his chest. If I caused a scene now, if I started a shouting match, the stress really could kill him. His heart was hanging by the friliest of threads. I had to be smart. I had to be the foreman. Assess the danger. Make a plan. Execute. I could not fight this battle here. Not while he was so weak. Okay, son, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. I must be mixed up. I'm getting old. You know, memory is not what it used to be. You just rest. Listen to Clara. I walked to the door. Clara followed me out into the hallway. She closed the bedroom door softly behind her. As soon as the latch clicked, she turned on me. She didn't yell. She stepped directly into my personal space, smelling simultaneously of lavender and cold, unadulterated malice. You need to leave, Victor, she whispered, the use of my first name a chilling threat. You are confusing him. You are interfering with his treatment. If you come back here and stress him out again, I will get a legal injunction. I will ban you from this house. I will not let you see him or Lily again. Do you understand? I looked at this woman, this complete, dangerous stranger. I thought about the $300,000. I thought about the daily lunches. I thought about the massive, multi-million-dollar insurance policy that had to be hiding somewhere in this magnificent, false tomb. I understand, Clara, I said. I understand perfectly. I sat in my battered truck at the end of the long, curving driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the cheap plastic creaked. I had told myself I was leaving. I was going to drive to a police station or hire a private investigator. But something held me fast. It was the same primal instinct that told me when a deep trench was about to collapse, the gut feeling that had saved my cruise from disaster a dozen times. I looked in the rearview mirror. Clara was in the side yard, pacing back and forth, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She looked agitated, her free hand chopping the air in sharp, urgent gestures. She was completely distracted. I knew I had maybe 5 minutes of unguarded time. I turned the key, but only far enough to kill the engine. I didn't have a key to the front door anymore. Clara had ensured that when they changed the high-security locks last month. But I knew the numerical keypad code to the garage entry. It was David's birthday, 0416. I punched the numbers in. The heavy, insulated door slid up with a hydraulic groan. I ducked under it when it was only waist-high, scrambling into the semi-darkness of the vast garage like a thief. I hit the button to close it immediately, plunging myself into a quiet, cold tomb of concrete and expensive cars. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was breaking into my own son's house. I was a criminal in the home I had paid for. I entered the main house through the mudroom. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the large refrigeration unit. I crept down the hallway, my heavy work boots making no sound on the polished hardwood floor, because I had learned over decades how to walk on unfinished structural beams without vibrating the house. I headed straight for David's home office. It was a room I had helped him paint just 6 months ago. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. The room was a mess. David, an investment advisor, was usually meticulous, keeping everything in its hyper-organized place. But this room looked like a slow-moving storm had hit it. Papers were strewn across the massive mahogany desk. Unopened envelopes were piled haphazardly on the floor. It smelled of stale coffee, expensive leather, and profound neglect. This was the room of a man who had given up the fight. I went to the desk. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I would recognize it when my hands found it. I sifted through the massive pile of mail, past due notices for premium credit cards, a stiff warning from the Homeowners Association about the lawn's maintenance, and medical bills from Dr. Elias. And then, buried under a stack of glossy junk mail, I saw a thick, ominous envelope with a large, embossed red stamp on the corner. It was from a company called Sentinel Prime Assurance. I tore it open. My hands were shaking so badly, I ripped the paper. I pulled out the document. It was a premium notice for a specialized life insurance policy. I scanned the numbers. The monthly premium was an astronomical $5,500. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of cold air. That was an insane amount of money. Who pays that much for a term life policy? Then I saw the coverage amount. $7 million. The number sat there on the crisp paper, black and stark. $7 million. I checked the date the policy had been taken out. It had been activated just 4 months ago, right around the time David's debts peaked. Right around the time Clara suddenly started talking about his stress levels. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The math was so simple, so brutal, it made my head spin. David was sick. He was dying. And if he died, Clara walked away with $7 million. She could pay off the $1.5 million house. She could settle whatever immense debts they had. She would be a rich, young widow, living a life of perpetual ease. And the detox, the cornstarch pills, it all fit perfectly. If David died of a heart attack, an inevitable complication of his history would look entirely natural. No one would question it. The autopsy would show his heart simply gave out. They wouldn't look for poison because there was no poison. There was just the absence of medicine. She was killing him by systematically taking away the only thing keeping his frail heart alive. I heard the back door slide open with a muffled hydraulic sigh. Claire was coming back inside. I shoved the document back into the envelope and buried it deep under the stack of mail, frantically trying to make the pile look exactly as I had found it. I backed out of the room, my heart thumping so loud I was certain she could hear it from the kitchen. I slipped into the mudroom just as I heard her expensive heels clicking sharply on the imported tile floor. I hate this, she was saying urgently into her phone. I hate waiting. It's taking too long. I need this dealt with before the end of the month. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I slipped out the side door of the garage, pressing the keypad to close it behind me. I ran to my truck, crouching low in the shadows so she wouldn't spot me through the large window panes. I started the heavy Ford engine and peeled out of the driveway, not caring at all about the squeal of the tires this time. I drove until I was 3 miles away, pulling into the desolate, empty lot of an abandoned factory complex. I leaned my head against the cold steering wheel and let out a raw, guttural cry of pure, agonizing defeat. My daughter-in-law was murdering my son for $7 million. I pulled out my phone and dialed Javier. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight. "Victor, where are you? I've been calling. I found it," I said, my voice trembling with cold rage. "I found the motive. Javier, there's a $7 million life insurance policy on David. She took it out 4 months ago." Javier let out a long, low whistle. $7 million. That is an ocean of motive, Victor. That is enough to make a lot of people do very bad things and sleep soundly afterwards. "She is killing him, Javier," I said, tears streaming down my face. "She is starving his heart to get the payout. She's going to let him die and then live like a queen on his grave. I have to go to the police. I have to tell them." "No," Javier said sharply. "Victor, stop. Listen to me. Do not go to the police. Not yet. Not like this." "Why not?" I shouted, slamming my fist against the faded dashboard. "She's killing him." "Because you have nothing that stands up in court, Victor," Javier snapped back, his voice cutting and cold. "You have a story about a lunch cooler you threw away. You have a panic phone call from a woman who gave you a plausible cover story. And you have an insurance policy that is perfectly legal. Wives take out policies on husbands every day. If you go to the cops now, Clara will spin it. She will say you are a senile, grieving old man who is confused about his son's complex German medication. She will say the policy was David's idea. She will say the cornstarch was just a baking mix-up. And while the cops are writing reports and doing absolutely nothing, she will finish the job. She will make sure he takes the rest of those fake pills, and he will be dead before they even open a file." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned bone white. "Then what do I do? I can't just watch him die." "We need proof," Javier said, his voice calm and meticulously cold. "Real, physical, irrefutable proof. We need the real medicine." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Victor. If she is swapping the pills, she has to have the real one somewhere. She cannot simply throw away 3 months' worth of expensive control medication. She needs to refill the prescription periodically to keep up the appearance with the pharmacy and the doctors. She needs to show the bottles if anyone asks. The real cardiac stabilizer is somewhere in that house. If we can find it, and if we can find the stash of cornstarch pills she is making, then we have her. Then we have concrete evidence of intent." "You want me to break in again?" I asked, a tremor of dread running through me. "I want us to save your son, Victor," Javier said. "And there's only one way to do that. We need to find where she is hiding the real drugs, and we need to swap them back. We need to put the real medicine back into his organizer without her knowing." "Swap them back?" "Yes. If David starts getting better while he is supposedly on her detox, it proves the detox is a lie, and it saves his life immediately. If he gets better, Clara will panic. She will be forced to make a huge mistake, and we will be there to catch her. But first, you need to get us inside that house long enough to search it thoroughly." I thought about the massive house. I thought about the heavy, locked doors. I thought about Clara's vigilant, hostile eyes. "I need a key," I said. "I don't have a key." "Then you need to get one," Javier said, his voice hardening. "And you need to do it soon, Victor. Every hour that passes is another hour your son's heart is struggling to beat its last. You know her routine. You know her habits. Find a way, Ben. Be the foreman. Solve the problem." I hung up the phone. I looked at my rough, calloused hands. Hands that had built the framework for countless buildings. Hands that had tied rebar and poured concrete. I wasn't a detective. I was not a spy. But for $7 million, my daughter-in-law had turned into a calculating monster. And to defeat a monster, I knew I had to become something much scarier myself. I couldn't sleep. The profound doubt was eating me alive. Javier's words kept replaying in the dark silence of my apartment. That sounds like a countdown timer. I needed to know the clinical truth to confirm the depths of her deception. I needed to talk to the one person who knew David's medical history better than anyone. I sat in my truck the next morning, a frigid Sunday, and called Dr. Elias, David's trusted cardiologist for the last 10 years. My hand shook visibly as I held the phone to my ear. "Dr. Elias," I said when he finally came on the line, "I am deeply sorry to bother you at home. I am confused about David's new course of treatment." "New treatment, Victor?" Elias asked, his voice professional but clearly puzzled. "What exactly do you mean?" "The detox," I said, carefully testing the waters. "Did you refer David to a specialist from Johns Hopkins? A Dr. Alistair Chun?" "Rachel Clara said you signed off on a placebo cycle to prepare him for some new German biocompound." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, thick, and instant. Then, Elias's voice came back, sharp and alarmed. "Victor, who on earth told you this?" "Clara," I whispered, the name tasting like ash. "Victor, listen to me very carefully," Elias said, his professional tone turning icy and authoritarian. "There is no Dr. Chun. There is no detox protocol for David's cardiac disorder. If David stops taking his cardiac stabilizer and immunosuppressants, his heart will fail. He could die within days. This is not a treatment. This is willful negligence." I felt the blood drain from my face completely. "But the pills," she said. "She picked up the pills from your pharmacy." "Clara came into my office last Tuesday," Elias interrupted, his voice cutting through my panic. "She picked up David's full refill 3-month supply of the extended-release stabilizer. The copay alone was nearly $500. I handed the sealed bag to her myself. "She has the medicine, Victor. The life-saving medicine is in her possession." The phone almost slipped from my grasp. She had the cure. She had the life-saving drugs in her possession, enough to keep him alive for the next 90 days. And she was choosing to feed him cornstarch. She wasn't just negligent. She was methodical. She was choosing to murder him slowly. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice dead. That is all I needed to know. I hung up. The initial shock and grief were gone, replaced by a focused, cold, absolute rage. I needed to get into that house. I needed to find those pills. But Clara had changed the locks. I couldn't just walk in. I needed a key, and I needed to use her own manipulative routine against her. I drove back to my miserable apartment. I needed a flawless, simple plan. Clara prided herself on playing the perfect, solicitous daughter-in-law. She loved to play the caretaker, especially when it reflected well on her image. I would use that image against her. I would use her own fake kindness as a weapon to get me the key. I set the stage. I pulled a dilapidated, sparking heating pad out of my closet and draped it dramatically over my lumpy mattress. I scattered some old painkiller bottles, Eleanor's old ones, on the nightstand. I tangled the cheap sheets to look like I had been thrashing in acute pain. I even added a small, realistic-looking smudge of dark red ink to the sheet near my lower back. Then, I dialed her number. I closed my eyes and channeled every ounce of real pain, every joint ache, and every bone-weary exhaustion from my 80 years of hard labor. "Clara," I wheezed into the phone, letting my voice crack with manufactured agony. "Dad, Victor, what is wrong?" she asked, immediately sounding concerned. Her alarm was genuine, not because of me, but because I was a complication to her current situation. I gasped, letting a small, pathetic whimper escape. "At the shipyard, my back. I can't move. I'm stuck here in bed. I haven't eaten a thing all day." "Oh no," she cried, her voice thick with performative sympathy. "Do you need me to call an ambulance?" "No money for that, child," I groaned, playing the broke, pitiable old man. Could you possibly bring me some of that good chicken soup, please? I'm starving." She took the bait instantly. The thought of being Florence Nightingale to the old man who bankrolled her mansion was too appealing to resist. "I'm on my way, Dad. Stay right there. Don't move a muscle." Exactly 35 minutes later, she was bustling into my dump of an apartment like a celebrity doctor in her expensive beige trench coat. She set her massive, designer leather handbag, the kind that costs more than my annual rent, on the only solid chair right next to my bed. "You poor thing," she cooed, touching my forehead with a cool, clinical hand. "I'll heat this soup up for you right away." She turned and walked to the tiny, grimy kitchenette. I heard the faint hum of the old microwave coming to life. This was my only chance. I sat up instantly, ignoring the stiffness and the genuine protests on my lower back. I reached for her massive bag. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a confined jackhammer. I unzipped the main compartment. It was a mess of high-end makeup, receipts, and used tissues. My rough, calloused fingers clawed through the clutter, searching for the cold, sharp bite of metal. I heard the microwave emit a sharp, decisive dong. Panic surged through me. I dug deeper. My fingers brushed against a heavy key ring. I grabbed it. It was weighty, jangling with dozens of specialized locks. I quickly separated the keys, looking for the one with the distinctive blue plastic cap, the spare key she kept for the house manager or the dog walker. "Dad, you okay?" Clara called out from the kitchen. I froze. "Just shifting," I groaned loudly, adding a few strained sounds. I ripped the single house key off the ring. I shoved it deep under my pillow just as she walked back into the room. She was smiling, holding a steaming bowl of store-bought soup. She looked at me, then back at her bag. The zipper was perhaps a fraction of an inch wider than she had left it. I held my breath, preparing for the interrogation. "Here we go," she said, oblivious or simply too self-absorbed to notice. "Nice and hot, Victor." She fed me the soup. The woman who was systematically murdering my son was feeding me my dinner. I swallowed every spoonful, choking down the burning bile and the rising wave of disgust. I needed her to believe I was weak and fully disabled. I needed her to believe she was utterly in control of the situation. "You rest now," she said, kissing my forehead with a quick, dry peck as she gathered her things to leave. "I have to get back to David. The detox is really draining him today." "Give him my love," I said, watching her go, forcing the words out. As soon as the apartment door clicked shut, I bolted upright. The pain was gone. I pulled the cold silver key from under my pillow. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I dialed Javier. "I got it," I said, my voice barely a whisper, thick with adrenaline. "Pick me up. We going tonight." Javier picked me up in his battered, utilitarian work van at 7 o'clock in the evening. The autumn sun was setting, casting long, stark shadows across the upscale streets of the suburb. We parked 3 houses down from David and Clara's place, killing the engine and sitting in the growing darkness like 2 professionals casing a job. I felt sick. I was 80 years old, a man who had built skyscrapers and managed crews of hundreds. And here I was, about to burglarize the home I had paid for, committing a crime to save my son's life. We waited. I knew their schedule. Clara had mentioned on the phone that she was taking David to a late appointment at a holistic wellness center for some kind of deep tissue relaxation therapy to aid the detox. It was another lie, of course, probably just a few hours spent driving around the city or sitting in a quiet park to maintain the dangerous charade, but it bought us an hour, maybe 2, of critical time. At 7:15, the garage door opened. Clara's luxury SUV backed out slowly. I saw David in the passenger seat. Even from this distance, his head was lolling faintly against the headrest, his mouth slightly open. He looked disturbingly frail, like a ghost being driven to a premature grave. My hands clenched in a fist on my knees. "Hold on, son," I whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." As soon as they turned the corner, we moved. We walked quickly up the driveway, keeping our heads down, using the deep shadows cast by the imported cedar tree. I pulled the stolen silver key from my pocket. It felt hot and sharp in my hand. I slid it into the high-security lock. It turned with a smooth, silent click. We were in. The house was silent, filled only with the low, even hum of the central air conditioning and the cloying smell of that expensive lavender potpourri. It felt like a magnificent tomb, a very costly marble-floored waiting room for death. "Upstairs," I whispered to Javier. "That's where she keeps her most valuable secrets." We climbed the wide stairs, our boots heavy on the plush, thick carpet. I felt a wave of profound guilt wash over me, thick and suffocating. This was my son's private sanctuary. A father shouldn't be creeping through his child's home, rifling through their secrets. It felt like a violation of the natural order of things. But then I remembered David's clay-colored skin and the way he gasped for air, and the guilt hardened instantly into iron-cold resolve. "You take the master bath," I told Javier. "Check the mirrored medicine cabinet. Check under the sinks, in any lockbox. I will take the bedroom." I walked into the master suite. It was immaculate. The massive bed was made with military precision. There was not a speck of dust or disorder anywhere. It was the room of a woman who controlled everything. I started with the bedside tables. Nothing but books on investment and bottles of expensive moisturizing lotions. I checked the walk-in closet. Rows of designer dresses and suits, but no hidden safe or stash. I turned to the large, dark cherrywood dresser against the far wall. It was a massive, imposing piece of custom-built furniture. I opened the top drawer on David's side. Socks, custom underwear, heavy wristwatches, nothing but the surface of a man's life. I moved to Clara's side. I hesitated briefly. Opening a woman's drawer felt different, crossing a line that felt almost sacrilegious. But I gritted my teeth and pulled the delicate antique brass handle. The drawer slid open silently. It was filled with silk and lace, expensive, delicate lingerie, items that cost more than my weekly paycheck. I felt my face briefly heat up with shame, but I forced myself to look. I ran my rough, calloused hands under the layers of fragile fabric, feeling for anything hard, anything cold, anything plastic. My fingers brushed against something at the very back of the drawer, buried deep beneath a thick pile of satin slips. It was a hard, cylindrical object wrapped tightly in soft fabric. I pulled it out. It was a dark, crimson silk scarf, rolled tightly like a scroll. I unwrapped it, and there they were, 3 standard orange pharmacy bottles. My heart hammered against my ribs, an uncontrolled engine. I held them up to the dim light coming from the hallway. The labels were crisp and new. David Rourke, cardiac stabilizer, immunosuppressants. I checked the dates. They had been filled exactly 9 days ago. She had them. She had the cure. She had the life-saving chemicals that could stop my son's heart from failing, and she had buried them deep in her underwear drawer like a dirty, shameful secret. She wrapped them in silk while she fed him chalk and watched him slowly fade. A pure, blinding, white-hot rage gripped me so fiercely that my vision blurred for a second. This wasn't just simple greed. This was calculated, prolonged cruelty. This was a game to her. "Javier," I hissed. He appeared in the doorway a second later, holding the clear plastic pill organizer we had seen earlier. He had found it inside a decorative ceramic container on the bathroom counter. "I found them," I said, my voice shaking with fury. She hid them in her lingerie drawer. Javier looked at the bottles in my hand. He let out a low, rough curse. "That is cold, Victor. That is ice cold." He set the organizer on the dresser. It was completely filled for the rest of the week Wednesday night through Sunday, all the slots stuffed with the white, crumbly cornstarch pills. "We have to work fast now," Javier said, snapping instantly into the focused medic. "Open the bottles." I popped the child safety cap off the main cardiac stabilizer bottle. Inside were small, hard white and crimson tablets. Real medicine. I poured a small pile into my hand. They looked visually identical to the fake ones at a casual glance. But up close, you could see the faint professional polymer coating. These were uniform, shiny, and perfectly manufactured. Javier dumped the entire stash of cornstarch pills out of the organizer and swept them meticulously into a small, pre-labeled zipper lock bag he had brought from his pocket. "We're keeping these," he said. "Evidence." Then, with the steady, practiced hands of a man who had often dealt with life and death under pressure, we began the swap. We placed the real cardiac stabilizer and the real immunosuppressants into the slots. Wednesday night, Thursday morning, Thursday noon, we filled every single compartment with the real, life-saving drugs. We replaced every single lie with a hard, medical truth. When we were finished, the organizer looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. But now, instead of a calculated death sentence, it was a precise chemical lifeline. "Put the bottles back," Javier said, his eyes scanning the hallway. Exactly where you found them. We leave no trace. I wrapped the mostly full bottles back in the crimson silk scarf. I shoved them deep into the back of the drawer, under the satin slips, arranging the delicate fabric so it looked completely undisturbed. I closed the drawer with excruciating care. We checked the room. We smoothed the plush carpet where we had walked. We made sure we left absolutely no trace of our presence. We were ghosts. We went back downstairs and slipped out through the garage, locking the heavy door behind us. We were back in Javier's van before the streetlights on the main road had even fully flickered on. As we drove away, the crushing adrenaline suddenly crashed, leaving me completely exhausted and shaking. I looked at the massive house one last time in the side mirror. It looked quiet, peaceful, utterly normal. But I knew a war had just been silently declared inside those walls. Now we wait, Javier said, his voice flat, lighting a small cigar with a trembling hand. Wait for what? I asked, my voice barely a croak. We wait to see if he lives, Javier said, exhaling a plume of smoke. If he takes those pills tonight and tomorrow morning, his heart will finally get the crucial support it needs. The fluid in his lungs should start to clear. His color should come back. And when that happens, Victor, when he starts getting better instead of dying, Clara is going to panic. I nodded slowly. I understood the cold logic. We had set a perfect trap. Clara's murder plan relied entirely on David getting steadily worse, facilitating a natural death by the impending deadline she'd mentioned on the phone. If he suddenly got better while supposedly on her detox, her entire story would fall apart. She would realize someone had interfered with her meticulous plan. And when she realizes that, I said, staring out at the dark, cold city streets, she's going to make a crucial mistake. Exactly, Javier confirmed. And we will be there to catch her. I went home to my cramped apartment. I sat in the dark, clutching my phone. I pictured David walking into that house, tired and fading. I pictured him drinking a glass of water and swallowing the genuine pills we had planted. I prayed. I am not a religious man, not since Eleanor died, but I prayed that night. I prayed that the medicine was strong enough. I prayed that we were not too late. I didn't sleep a wink. I just watched the phone, waiting for the signal that the tide had decisively turned. I was terrified, yes, but for the first time in a week, I wasn't helpless. I had struck back. I had put a crucial shield between my son and the woman who wanted him dead. Now I just had to wait for the monster to show her true, panicked face. The 24 hours following the break-in were a blur of cold paranoia. I was physically back in my miserable apartment, but my mind was still in that bedroom, obsessively wondering if Clara had opened her lingerie drawer, wondering if she had noticed the pill bottles were shifted a fraction of an inch. I couldn't just sit there. The silence of my small, damp room felt like a coffin closing around me. On Tuesday night, the night before David's next scheduled doctor's appointment, unable to bear the silence, I drove back to their neighborhood. I parked 2 blocks away, hidden deep in the shadow of a massive, old oak tree, just watching. I needed to see if the ambulance came. I needed to know if my gamble had killed my son or finally saved him. That's when I saw them for the first time. Not in a private investigator's grainy photo, but in flesh and blood. A dark, black, custom-outfitted SUV rolled slowly down the street. It had its headlights turned off, using only the faint, amber parking lights glowing like the focused eyes of a predator. It crawled past the immaculate lawns and sleeping, silent houses until it stopped directly in front of David's long, stone driveway. I slumped low in my truck's seat, holding my breath, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The tinted window of the SUV rolled down with a slow, hydraulic hum. A lit cigarette, but flicked out, sparking dramatically against the pristine cobblestone pavement. Then a massive man leaned out. Even from this distance, I could feel the concentrated menace radiating off him. He wasn't looking at the house casually. He was studying it. He was measuring the distance from the front door to the street. He was clearly calculating angles and response times. He pulled out a slim, dark phone and snapped a quick picture of the second-floor front window Lily's bedroom window. A cold, primal rage washed over me instantly, overriding my fear. These weren't just lone sharks. These were professional, cold-blooded enforcers. They were marking their territory before the slaughter. Then the front door of the mansion opened. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a thick, expensive cashmere bathrobe, hugging herself tight against the late-night chill. She looked small, utterly frail, nothing like the composed, calculating woman who had lied so smoothly to my face. She stared fixedly at the black SUV. She didn't scream. She didn't run inside. She just stood there, completely frozen, like a deer caught in the high beams of a massive semi-truck. The man in the SUV laughed. It was a low, cruel, entirely joyless sound that carried clearly on the night wind. He raised his hand, formed a gun shape with his index finger and thumb, pointed it directly at her, and mimed the harsh recoil of a gunshot. Clara flinched violently, as if she'd been physically struck. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the custom welcome mat, and slammed the heavy front door shut. The loud, metallic sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed sharply in the quiet, suburban street. The black SUV lingered for another agonizing 10 seconds, an eternity, before peeling away into the dark night. I sat there gripping my steering wheel until my knuckles turned painful white. I realized then that Javier was right. This wasn't a simple game of greed anymore. Clara wasn't killing David for a vacation fund. She was terrified. She was living inside a war zone that I had only just discovered. I want to drive up there. I wanted to bang on the door and tell her I knew the truth, tell her I could help. But I stopped myself. If I revealed my hand now, before the medicine had enough time to work, before David's mind had cleared and his strength returned, I would blow everything. I needed David strong enough to face the truth. I needed him alive. I started my truck and drove away, leaving the house to its expensive nightmares. But that image, the man pointing a finger gun at my daughter-in-law, burned itself into my retinas. It confirmed one thing. The clock wasn't just ticking for David's heart. It was ticking for all of us. And I was rapidly running out of time. The next 72 hours were a complete masterclass in psychological torture. I sat in my cramped, mildew-scented apartment, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, waiting for my phone to ring or not ring. I got no sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's gray face. I saw the fluid swelling his ankles. I saw the white chalk crumbling in Javier's hand. I had played God. I had broken into a man's house and secretly messed with his critical medication. Javier assured me that the cardiac stabilizer would work fast, that it would dilate his blood vessels, drop the immediate pressure on his failing heart, and start to clear the fluid from his lungs within hours. But Javier was a medic in a war zone 30 years ago. What if we were already too late? What if the damage Clara had inflicted was already permanent? What if by the time I swapped those pills, David's heart was too far gone to be saved? I jumped every single time a distant siren wailed outside on the Baltimore streets, my heart seizing up, terrified it was an ambulance racing toward the suburbs, terrified that Clara had found the real pills and flushed them down the toilet, terrified that I would get a call from the coroner instead of my living son. Wednesday afternoon arrived like a slow-motion execution. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I was pacing the floor, wearing a physical path in the cheap linoleum, counting the cracks in the tiles, just to keep my mind from snapping entirely. Then, at 2:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. It vibrated against the nightstand like an angry hornet. I stared at the screen. David. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I reached out a trembling hand. This was it. This was the moment I found out if I was a savior or a complete, devastating failure. I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, bracing myself for a weak whisper. I braced myself for Clara's fake, broken voice telling me he was gone. "Dad!" The voice that boomed through the speaker nearly made me drop the phone onto the floor. It wasn't a wheeze. It wasn't the dry rattle of a dying man. It was loud. It was resonant. It was the voice of the capable, strong man I had raised, the man who used to carry 100-pound bags of cement like they were light pillows. "David," I asked, sinking onto the edge of my lumpy mattress because my knees suddenly felt like water. "Is that really you?" "You are not going to believe this, Dad," he said, and I could clearly hear the sheer, genuine grin in his voice. I could hear the oxygen completely filling his lungs. I feel incredible. I mean, absolutely, unbelievably incredible. What? What happened? I asked, playing the part of the clueless, anxious father, though my heart was soaring high above the shipyard cranes. I woke up this morning, and it was like a massive fog had just lifted, he said, the words tumbling out of him in a rush of pure, clean adrenaline. That heavy weight on my chest. Gone. The terrible swelling in my legs? Completely gone. I can actually see my ankles again, Dad. I actually walked Lily to the bus stop this morning, a full 3/4 of a mile, and I didn't even get winded. I didn't even have to stop. I closed my eyes, a wave of powerful, raw relief washing over me. So powerful it made me completely dizzy. It worked. The real medicine, the chemistry I had smuggled into his drawer like a common thief, was coursing through his veins. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. My son was alive. That is wonderful news, son, I said, my voice thick with emotion I desperately try to hide. I'm so glad it's this detox, Dad, David continued, his enthusiasm bubbling over. Clara was right. I doubted her, I admit it. The first few days were hell. I truly felt like I was dying. But she kept saying it was just the toxins leaving my system. And she was right. Dr. Chun is a genius. My body just needed a hard, absolute reset. I feel 10 years younger. I even mowed the entire back lawn this afternoon. Can you believe that? I pushed the mower for 40 minutes. I felt a sudden spike of cold, sharp anger pierce through my relief. He was praising the poison. He was crediting the detox, the very lie that was designed to kill him, for the miraculous recovery I had delivered. He was thanking the woman who had tried to stop his heart for the miracle I had engineered. That is amazing, David, I said, forcing my voice to remain neutral and calm. And what does Clara think? Is she happy? There was a noticeable pause on the line, a strange, hesitant silence that spoke volumes. Yeah, she is, David said, his tone shifting slightly, losing some of its manic energy. But she is definitely surprised. I think she's just in shock. She keeps asking me if I'm sure I feel okay. She is really worried I might be having a, what did she call it? A false rally. Like a surge of energy right before a crash. She keeps trying to make me lie down, but I have too much energy. I feel like I could run through a wall. Hey, honey, David shouted away from the phone, his voice echoing in their large kitchen. Dad, Victor is on the line. I told him the detox worked. I told him I'm back. I strained my ears against the phone's speaker. In the background, I heard a distinct crash, the unmistakable sound of heavy glass shattering on a hard tile floor. Then I heard Clara's voice. It wasn't the smooth, confident, syrup-sweet voice of the woman who had kicked me out of the bedroom on Saturday. It was high, thin, and vibrating with pure, unadulterated terror. David, stop, she shrieked hysterically in the distance. Sit down. You shouldn't be up. Your heart. It isn't ready. You are going to kill yourself. She wasn't worried for his health. She was terrified of his life. She was watching a man who was supposed to be a corpse mow the lawn and walk the dog. She was watching her $7 million payout walk right out the front door. The plan was falling apart right in front of her eyes. And she didn't know why. She must be panicking, wondering if she had somehow mixed up the pills herself, wondering if the chalk formula was defective, wondering why the universe was denying her the death she desperately needed to survive. Let me talk to her, David, I said, a cold, predatory satisfaction settling deep in my gut. Sure, hold on. I heard the phone fumble. Here, all right, Dad wants to say hi. Hello, Dad, Clara said. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, like she had just finished running a mile. Clara, I said, keeping my voice utterly cheerful and loud, the voice of a completely clueless, happy grandfather. David sounds fantastic. You must be so relieved that Dr. Chen really knows his stuff. Huh? That blind cycle worked exactly like you said it would. I could hear her breathing hitch. It was the sound of a completely trapped animal. Igrigagia. Yes, she stuttered, struggling for air. It is a miracle. We are so blessed. But we have to be careful, Dad. It could be a fluctuation. We don't want to get our hopes up too high. She was scrambling desperately. I could hear the internal gears grinding in her head, trying to find a new angle, a new lie to put him back in that bed, to stop his heart again. She sounded absolutely desperate. "Well, you just keep doing what you were doing," I said, my voice dripping with an irony she couldn't possibly detect. "It is clearly working, Clara. Give him his afternoon dose. Don't miss a single one." I will," she whispered. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, savoring the small, cold victory. My son was safe for the moment. The medicine was in his system. Clara was completely cornered. But the war wasn't over. I still didn't understand the full, terrifying picture. I knew how she was doing it, but I needed to understand the deep, specific pressure. Greed was powerful, yes, but $7 million felt specific. It felt urgent. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't David this time. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Victor Rourke?" a gravelly voice asked. "Yes, this is Victor. This is Marcus Vance, the private investigator." My stomach tightened instantly. I had hired Vance with the last $6,000 I had to my name. It was a gamble, throwing away my entire emergency safety net, but I needed to know what was truly happening in my son's financial life. "I found something, Victor," Vance said. His voice was grim, stripped of the professional detachment he usually carried. "And you are absolutely not going to like it. In fact, you need to see this immediately. Can you meet me? I'm at the Harbor Diner on Fleet Street." "I'm on my way." I drove to the diner in a haze, the sudden rush of information creating a terrifying clarity. Vance was sitting in a dark, back booth, nursing a black coffee and chain-smoking openly, even though the glaring no smoking sign was posted directly above his head. He looked like a man who had seen everything and was deeply disillusioned by it all. He didn't waste any time with polite pleasantries. He slid a thick, brown manila folder across the sticky, Formica tabletop. "I dug deep into your son's financials," Vance said, tapping the folder with a nicotine-stained finger. "And I looked into the wife. Clara is clean, mostly. She spends a lot on designer clothes, sure, keeping up appearances, but nothing overtly criminal. But your son, David," he took a deep drag and blew the smoke away from me with a sigh. "Your son is drowning, Victor, but not in a mortgage, not in simple credit card debt. He's drowning in something much worse." I opened the folder. It was a suffocating sea of red ink, bank statements, credit card bills, and page after page of transaction logs. "What exactly am I looking at?" I asked, squinting at the dense rows of numbers. "Addiction," Vance said flatly. "High-stakes online gambling. Private crypto casinos based in the Cayman Islands. Offshore sports betting apps, high-roller poker sites. He lost the original capital you gave him, the $300,000 in the first 6 months." I felt the bottom drop out of my world. He lost it. He tried to double it on a volatile crypto scheme and lost nearly 85%, Vance confirmed. Then he tried to win it back on sports betting. He chased his losses, Victor, and he kept digging the hole deeper. My own house, my memories, my retirement, the entire foundation of my future gone. Vaporized in an online casino while I was sleeping on a lumpy mattress and working myself to death. "It gets much worse," Vance said, his voice dropping lower, forcing me to lean in. "When the legitimate banks cut him off, when the credit card were completely maxed out, he didn't stop. He went to private lenders. The kind that don't check credit scores, but do check where your kids go to school. Loan sharks?" I whispered, the word tasting like rust. "Big ones," Vance confirmed. "A syndicate operating out of the southeast. They run the numbers for half the city's high rollers." I found the digital paper trail on a burner phone account linked to his personal email. Threats, deadlines, pictures. He slid a glossy, high-resolution photo across the table. It was a surveillance shot. My son David, standing in a deserted parking lot, arguing desperately with two massive, menacing men next to a black SUV. David looked utterly terrified. "He owes them $400,000, Vance said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Principal plus the daily vig. They're squeezing him like an orange. They told him if he didn't pay by the end of the month next Tuesday, they were going to start taking payment in blood." I stared at the photo. For $100,000. My son wasn't just irresponsible with money. He was a desperate, cornered addict who had dragged his entire family into a pit of vipers. And the insurance policy? I asked, my voice hollow. Vance nodded. That's the kicker. He took out that $7 million policy 90 days ago. Sentinel Prime Assurance. I checked the fine print. There's a standard suicide clause. Victor, if he kills himself, fate, gun in the mouth, driving his car into a bridge abutment within the first 2 years, the policy pays nothing. $0. I sat back, the booth groaning under my sudden weight. The entire picture was violently shifting. It was rearranging itself into something far more horrifying than simple greed. So Clara knows, I said. She knows about the debt. She knows about the threats. She has to, Vance said, pulling out another photo. This one made my heart stop beating entirely. It was a close-up surveillance picture of my granddaughter, Lily, playing alone on the jungle gym at her elementary school. It was taken from a distance, shot through a chain-link fence, the image slightly blurred but terrifyingly clear. They sent this to David's phone yesterday, Vance said, his face grim. The accompanying text caption read, "Cute kid. Shame if she tripped and fell." They're explicitly threatening to kill his family, Victor, starting with Lily. I felt nauseous. The pieces clicked together with the heavy, sickening sound of a prison door slamming shut. Clara wasn't just killing David for a payday to buy clothes or a vacation home. She was killing him because there was a gun to her daughter's head. If David died of natural causes, a sudden cardiac arrest caused by his known medical history, the insurance paid out $7 million. She could pay off the sharks. She could save the house, or at least use the money to relocate and hide. Most importantly, she could save Lily. It was a cold, twisted, utterly horrific logic. Kill the husband to save the child. Sacrifice one life to save two. So she's doing it to pay the debt, I murmured, staring at the photo of my granddaughter. She's sacrificing him to save Lily. Or maybe David isn't on it, Vance countered, shrugging slightly. Maybe he doesn't have the guts to pull the trigger himself, so he outsourced the natural death to his wife. One thing is crystal clear, Victor, Vance finished. The deadline the Sharks gave him, the hard stop, is next Tuesday. I looked at the date on the calendar on the wall of the diner. Today was Friday. Tuesday was 4 days away. That was why Clara was panicking. That was why she was terrified when David started getting better. She was violently running out of time. If David didn't die by Tuesday, the Sharks would come for Lily. The detox had to work now, or it was all over. I pushed back from the booth. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was completely clear. The anger I had felt toward Clara was still there, but it was now complicated by horror and a deep, crushing pity. My son had created this mess, his addiction, his lies, his bottomless greed. He had invited the devil into his beautiful, fragile home, and now his wife was trying to pay the devil with his life. I threw a $40 bill onto the table for the coffee I hadn't touched. "Thank you, Vance. Where are you going?" Vance asked, extinguishing his cigarette. "I'm going to stop a murder," I said. I walked to my truck. I checked my phone. I had a voicemail from David. "Dad, pick up. I'm going to take Lily to the pier for ice cream. I feel great. This is the best day I've had in years." I listened to his happy, oblivious voice. He was celebrating his miraculous health while the executioner sharpened the axe. He was buying ice cream while his wife was probably frantically trying to figure out how to kill him faster and without detection. I realized then that I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't play games with pill organizers and secret keys. The danger was immediate, and it was standing on their doorstep. The black SUV wasn't just a threat. It was a promise of violence. I started the engine. I wasn't going back to the apartment. I was going directly to their house. And this time, I wasn't going to knock. I wasn't going to play the frail old man. I was going to kick the door down and force the terrifying truth into the light before the Sharks came to feed. I pulled out onto the road, my tires screeching loudly. Tuesday. I had until Tuesday. But looking at the desperation in Clara's eyes earlier, I knew David might not make it through the night if I didn't act immediately. I was halfway to their house when my phone buzzed against the dashboard. It was Vance. His voice was tight, stripped of all earlier cynicism. He sounded like a man watching a massive train wreck in slow motion. "Victor," he said, "you need to get there right now. I have eyes on the place from the main road. A black SUV just pulled up 3 houses down. No plates. Two guys inside, and they are absolutely not delivering pizza. They are watching the driveway with high-powered binoculars. My blood ran completely cold. The sharks were circling. They were not waiting for the end of the month. They were there to intimidate, to threaten, and perhaps to make good on the horrifying photos they had sent. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. My old Ford groaned in protest, the heavy engine whining as I pushed it past 70 on the suburban roads. I didn't care about speed tickets. I did not care about safety. My granddaughter was in that house. My son, the idiotic gambler, was in that house. And the woman who I thought was a simple murderer was in that house, terrified. I drove with the desperation of a man who has already lost too much and cannot afford to lose the rest. I screeched into the driveway, ignoring the black SUV parked down the street. I saw two heads turn in that vehicle, watching me, but they did not move. They were just the messengers of fear for now. I jumped out of the truck, my boots hitting the pavement hard. I did not go to the front door. I went straight for the garage keypad. 0416 David's birthday. I punched the numbers in so hard, I almost cracked the plastic. The heavy door began its slow, mechanical ascent. I ducked under it when it was only waist-high, scrambling into the garage like a soldier under fire. I burst into the mudroom. The house was not silent this time. It was filled with a horrific noise, high-pitched, hysterical screaming. It was coming from the kitchen. It was a raw, uncontrolled sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was my son. I ran down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I reached the kitchen doorway and stopped. The scene before me froze my breath in my lungs. It was a beautiful kitchen, I remembered, when they spent $50,000 on the granite countertops and custom cabinetry. But right now, it looked like a small war zone. Clara was slumped on the floor near the refrigerator, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with violent, racking sobs. She looked utterly broken, defeated. And David, my son, who just 3 days ago was on his deathbed, was standing over her. He looked vibrant. His color was good. His legs were strong. The real medicine I had swapped had done its job perfectly. He was physically healed, but mentally, he was utterly unraveling. He was holding an orange prescription bottle in his hand. He was shaking it at her, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated anguish. "Why am I not dead?" he screamed. His voice cracked, echoing off the expensive tile. "Why am I standing here, Clara? I took them all. I took every single one of them this morning. I stood in the bathroom and swallowed them. Why is my heart beating so strongly?" I stood in the shadows of the hallway, paralyzed. This was not what I expected. I expected to find Clara force-feeding him poison. I expected to find a clear victim and a clear villain. But David was not acting like a victim. He was acting like a desperate man whose plan had catastrophically failed. David threw the bottle across the room. It smashed against the subway tile backsplash, shattering into brittle orange plastic shards. "You promised me," David roared, tears streaming down his face. "You promised you would help me. I woke up today, feeling great. I walked Lily to the bus. I mowed the lawn. My heart is beating like a drum. Clara, it is strong. Why is it strong?" Clara looked up, her face a mess of mascara and tears. "I don't know, David," she wailed. "I swear to you, I don't know. I gave you the chalk. I made them myself. Just like you asked. I swapped them out. I hid the real ones in my drawer. I don't know why you were getting better. Maybe your heart is just too strong. Too strong." David laughed. It was a manic, terrifying sound. "My heart is garbage. It should have stopped 3 days ago. That was the plan. Natural causes. A heart attack in my sleep. The insurance pays out. You pay the sharks, and you and Lily are safe. That was the deal, Clara." He grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the island and hurled it at the wall. It exploded, showering the pristine kitchen with jagged glass. "Now look at me," he yelled, spreading his arms wide. "I am healthy. I am alive. And because I am alive, we are all dead. The deadline is Tuesday. If I'm not in the ground by Tuesday, they are coming for Lily. Do you understand that? They sent me a picture of her at recess." I stepped into the light. My heavy work boots crunched loudly on the broken glass. The sound cut through their screaming match like a gunshot. David froze. Clara gasped, pulling herself up against the cabinets. They both looked at me, their eyes wide, terrified, like children caught playing with matches while the house burned down. "Dad," David whispered. His face went pale, not from sickness, but from profound shame. I did not say a word. I walked to the center of the kitchen. I reached into the deep pocket of my canvas work jacket. My hand closed around the zipper lock bag Javier had given me, the bag filled with the white, crumbly cornstarch pills we had removed from the organizer. I tossed the bag onto the granite island. It landed with a soft thud, sliding across the polished surface until it stopped directly in front of David. "Are you looking for these?" I asked. My voice was low, steady, and dangerously calm. The silence in that kitchen was heavier than any steel beam I had ever lifted. The Zipperlock bag of chalk pills sat on the granite island like a grenade that had already gone off, leaving us in the wreckage. David stared at the white powder, his chest heaving, his face a mask of absolute devastation. He didn't look like a man who had been saved. He looked like a man who had just watched his last lifeboat sink. You switched them back," David whispered, his voice trembling violently. "You broke into my house and switched them back." "I saved your life, son," I said, my voice hard. "And you were standing there screaming because you were still breathing. Explain that to me. Explain to me why my son wants to die so badly he is yelling at his wife for not killing him." David collapsed. He didn't slide slowly this time. His legs just gave out. He hit the floor hard, his knees crunching on the broken glass from the vase he had thrown. He didn't seem to feel the pain. He put his head in his hands and let out a sound that I will never forget. It was a howley, raw, pure sound of animal despair. "It wasn't her, Dad," he sobbed, rocking back and forth violently. "It wasn't Clara. She didn't want to do it. I made her." I looked at Clara. She was huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, shaking. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading, tears cutting tracks through her makeup. She didn't look like a mastermind. She looked like a woman who had been broken into small, sharp pieces. "What do you mean, you made her?" I asked, stepping closer to David. David looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, wild with pain. "I owe them $400,000, Dad. Not the bank. I owe the kind of people who don't file lawsuits. They file missing persons reports." He took a shuddering breath. "They came to me last month. They show me pictures, Dad. Pictures of Clara coming out of the grocery store. Pictures of Lily on the playground at school. They knew her schedule. They knew her teacher's name. They told me the deadline was the end of the month. If I didn't pay the $400,000, they were going to start taking it out on them. They detailed exactly what they would do to Lily." I felt a cold, deep chill run down my spine. I had dealt with tough guys on construction sites, but this was different. This was pure, surgical evil. "So, I tried to find a way out," David continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "I tried to get loans. I tried to gamble my way back up, but I just dug the hole deeper. And then I realized I am worth more dead than alive." He pointed at the kitchen counter where a stack of mail sat. "The policy, $7 million. I took it out when I got the promotion last year before everything fell apart. I checked the fine print, Dad. I read every single word. There's a suicide clause. If I put a gun in my mouth, they pay nothing. The policy is void for 2 years for self-inflicted death." He looked at me, begging me to understand his twisted, lethal logic. "But if I die of natural causes, if my bad heart just finally gives out, they pay. They pay $7 million tax-free. Clara could pay off the sharks. She could save the house. She and Lily would be completely safe. It was the only way to guarantee their survival." "So you decided to stop the meds?" I said, my voice hollow. "It was the only way," David cried. "I knew my heart couldn't take it. Without the stabilizer, the pressure would build up. It would look like a standard cardiac arrest. No questions asked. The coroner would see my history and sign the death certificate. It would be clean. My death would save them. And Clara," I asked, looking at her, "how did you get your wife to become your executioner?" David squeezed his eyes shut. I told her everything. I showed her the pictures of Lily. She wanted to go to the police, but I told her we couldn't. If we went to the cops, the sharks would know. They would hurt Lily, just to prove a point. I told her there was no other way out. She refused, Dad. For days, she refused. She begged me to find another way. But I I gave her an ultimatum. Ultimatum? I repeated, dread twisting my stomach. I told her if she didn't help me do it quietly with the pills, I would go find the sharks myself. I told her I would provoke them. I told her I would make sure they killed me in the street violently. And I told her that if I did that, there was no guarantee they wouldn't hurt her and Lily anyway. I told her this was the only way to guarantee their safety and the payout. I forced her hand, Dad. I monstered her into it. Clara let out a sob that sounded like something tearing. I did not want to bend, she wailed, using my first name in a plea. I swear I measured the cornstarch. I cried every time I filled those capsules. Every time I handed him that lunch cooler, I felt like I was dying inside. But he said it was for Lily. He said he was doing it for Lily. I looked from one to the other. The tragedy of it was suffocating. Two people trapped in a nightmare of their own making the worst possible choices out of warped love and paralyzing fear. So, the detox, I said, looking at Clara, this specialist in New York. We had to tell you something, Clara whispered. David was getting so sick. You would have noticed. We needed a cover story. I thought if you believed he was getting cutting-edge treatment, you wouldn't look too closely. I just wanted to protect you from the truth. I didn't want you to know your son was sacrificing himself. Sacrificing himself. The words hung in the air, heavy with folly. David didn't see this as suicide. He saw it as martyrdom. He thought he was being a hero. You fool, I whispered. You absolute, self-pitying fool. I walked over to David. He flinched, expecting me to hit him. You think this is brave? I asked, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. You think leaving your wife with the memory of killing you is brave? You think leaving your daughter without a father is brave? You are not a hero, David. You are a coward. David looked up, stung. Dad, I did it for them. No, I roared. You did it because you were scared. You dug a hole with your gambling and your bottomless greed. And instead of climbing out, instead of asking for help, you decided to bury yourself in it. You were going to let your wife watch you die, gasping for air day after day, knowing she could save you, but couldn't because you threatened her. That isn't love, David. That is emotional torture. I pointed at Clara. Look at her. Look what you did to her. You didn't save her. You destroyed her. Even if the plan worked, even if you died and she got the money, how was she supposed to live with that? Every time she spent a dime of that $7 million, she would remember that she murdered her husband to get it. You were going to turn her into a shell, just like you. David looked at Clara. He really looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the broken posture. He saw the toll his sacrifice had taken. He slumped forward, completely defeated. I didn't know what else to do, he whispered, his voice broken. I was so scared. The image of my son, the strong, capable man I thought I raised, crumbled before my eyes. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't a hero. He was just a weak man who had made a series of catastrophic mistakes and then tried to fix them with the ultimate, final mistake. I felt a profound sense of loss. But he was still my son, and he was still alive. Get up, I said. My voice was tired, bone-weary. David didn't move. I said, get up. I grabbed him by the arm and hauled him roughly to his feet. He swayed, unsteady. The deadline, he mumbled. It's Tuesday, Dad. They are going to come. Let them come, I said. We are done hiding. We are done with lies. And we are certainly done with dying. I looked at the orange bottle he had smashed on the wall. The real medicine was scattered among the glass. Pick it up, I told Clara. Pick up every single pill. We're going to fix this, I said, looking David hard in the eye. But not your way. We're going to do it the hard way. The honest way. David shook his head, shamefaced. We don't have $400,000, Dad. We have nothing. I know, I said, but I'm still your father, and I'm not done yet. I turned away from him, unable to look at his pathetic, hopeful expression any longer. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The black SUV was still there, watching, waiting. I pulled out my phone. I had one card left to play. One card I had saved for 40 years. It would cost me everything I had left, every shred of pride, every remaining year of my life. But as I looked at my broken son and his terrified wife, I knew I had to play it. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Frank, I said when the voice answered. It's Victor. I need a favor. A very, very big favor. Frank agreed. He didn't ask for collateral. He didn't ask for a contract. He just asked for my word. And in that moment, my word was worth $400,000. I hung up the phone. I looked at the two broken people in front of me. The kitchen was quiet now, save for the humming of the refrigerator and the ragged breathing of my son. The black SUV outside had not moved. The sharks were still waiting. But now I had the bait to make them leave. I looked at the crumpled beneficiary form lying on the floor amidst the shattered glass. I picked it up, my joints popping in the silence. I smoothed it out on the granite countertop. The name stared up at me. Not Clara, not Lily, me. I looked at David. He was sitting on a bar stool now, his head in his hands. David, I said, my voice low, I need to understand this. I really need to understand this. You were going to leave Clara and Lily alone. You were going to give the money to me. David looked up. His eyes were red, swollen, filled with pain. It wasn't about leaving them, Dad, he whispered. It was about cleaning the slate. I did the math. I owe the Sharks $400,000. That leaves $6.6 million. Clara could sell this house, take $1 million to set herself and Lily up in a smaller place, pay for college. But the rest of $5.6 million, that was for you. For me? I asked, a fresh wave of horror washing over me. David, I am 80 years old. What am I going to do with $5 million? I live in a one-bedroom apartment. I eat sandwiches for lunch. That is exactly it. David cried, his voice cracking. You live in a dump because of me. You are working on the docks at 80 because of me. I took your house, Dad. I took the home you and Mom built. I took your golden years and flushed them down the toilet because I was too greedy. Do you know what it feels like to watch your father limp out of your house every morning to do manual labor because you are a failure? It eats you alive. He stopped in front of me, his chest heaving. I wanted to give it back, Dad. I wanted to give you a retirement. I wanted you to buy a condo in the Caribbean. I calculated it. The payout would cover the $300,000 I took, plus interest, plus pain and suffering, plus enough to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. My life insurance was the only asset I hadn't ruined. I thought it was the only way to fix it. I stared at him. I looked into the eyes of my son, and I saw a love so twisted, so warped by guilt and shame that it had become a weapon. He was trying to buy my forgiveness with his blood. He was trying to reimburse me for his existence. You think, I stammered, you think I want money more than I want you? You think a condo in the Caribbean is worth your life? I thought it was the only way to fix it, David whispered. You are an accountant, David, I said, walking over to him. You are good with numbers, but you are an idiot with people. You cannot pay me back with a check, son. You cannot refund a father's love. That $300,000 was paper. It was brick and wood. It wasn't me. You are me. You are my legacy, not the money. I gripped him tighter. If you had died, you wouldn't have saved me. You would have killed me. I would have spent every cent of that insurance money building a shrine to my failure as a father. David broke. He fell into me, sobbing into my chest, clutching my work vest like a drowning man. I am sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to make it right. I held him. We have work to do, I said, pulling away. Frank is wiring the money. We're going to pay these men. We're going to get them off your back. My phone pinged. A text message from my bank. Transfer received. $400,000. Let's go, I said, turning toward the garage. Let's go pay the bill. We walked out of the house together. We walked down the driveway to meet the black SUV. I held the phone in my hand like a shield. I was 80 years old. I was broke, but I was a father. The passenger window of the SUV rolled down. The man with the face like a clenched fist looked out. Who are you? He asked. His voice was like gravel in a mixer. I am his father, I said, stopping 3 feet from the car. And I am here to settle the account. Your boy owes us $400 large. I'm settling it, I growled. Wire transfer. Give me the routing number. He recited the numbers. My fingers were steady as I punched them into my banking app. $400,000. Everything Frank had just loaned me. My freedom. My dignity. David grabbed my arm. Dad, don't. You can't work for the rest of your life. It's too much. I'm not worth it. That is when I lost it. I turned and slapped him. It was a hard, stinging slap across the face that echoed in the quiet street. Shut up, I yelled. Don't you ever say that again. Your life is not cheap. I built skyscrapers, David. I did that so you could live. I will work until I die if that is what it takes to keep you breathing. Do not insult my sacrifice by telling me you aren't worth it. I hit confirm. It is sent, I said to the man. The man checked his phone. Then he nodded. It is there. Clear. He got back in the SUV. Tell your boy he is lucky, old man. Most guys don't have a daddy like you. The SUV backed out and drove away. The threat was gone. Dad, David whispered, holding his cheek. Where did you get that money? I called Frank, I said simply. I sold him the rest of my life. I promised him I would run his sites, train his crews, handle his safety inspections. I told him I would work for free until the debt is paid. But Dad, you are 80. That will kill you. Maybe, I said, but I will die standing up. And I will die knowing my son is alive to raise his daughter. I looked at David. First thing tomorrow, we are listing this house. You're going to sell it. You're going to move into a small apartment you can afford. And you dash. I said to Clara, you're going to get a job. No more secrets. And David, Gamblers Anonymous. Starting tonight. I walked back to my truck. I had just signed away my freedom. I had committed to years of grueling labor. But as I looked back at my son, holding his wife, alive and safe, I knew I had made the trade of the century. I bought my son's life for the price of my own comfort. I started the engine. I had a shift tomorrow. Frank would expect me at the site at 6 a.m. sharp, and I would be there. I would be the first one there because that is what a father does. I was poorer than I had ever been. I was deeper in debt than I had ever been. But as I drove through the city streets, I felt lighter than air. I had won. I had beaten the sharks. I had beaten the lies. And I had beaten death itself. And I had done it with nothing but a lunchbox and the absolute truth. The road ahead was going to be hard. It was going to be long. But I had my son back, and that was worth every drop of sweat I had left in me.